So when I first spoke to Neil about this, we were talking about what should be in the IDSC, what should be the various elements of this. And for some time, I've worked in what we call revenue operations and what I'd like to call global revenue operations, because I like that it's called GROW. I like the idea that what we're trying to do is actually help grow businesses. There are various kinds of businesses within this whole digital set. I break it down generally into three types. One is the huge, massive organizations like Google, and I was working in telecoms before that, and these massive companies have all the same issues. It can be quite difficult to collect, and the issues are now global, as Royston has said. But there are two other kind of companies. There's also the startup. It's very, very difficult to get startups off the ground. I mean, there are statistics that show that over 90% fail in the first year or 18 months. And listening to Markham earlier on is thinking of those journalists, and they were the people I hated as kids, because you'd watch them showing something like all those little turtles running down the beach trying to get free of the seagulls when they're bored, and just said, no, don't let the seagulls get them. I said, but isn't there a cameraman? Can't he help? Isn't there somebody talking over this? Can't they actually stop this thing? And I liken that a little bit to a lot of the great entrepreneurs I've met over the last few years. I work closely with the enterprise boards here just to help them get off the ground. And the biggest reason they actually tend to fail is it's not because they don't have a great idea. It's not because they don't have a good revenue model. It's more often than not, it's actually because they actually can't collect cash and they don't have enough cash to get them through the first 6 months, 1 year, 18 months. And it's not because they're necessarily not being financed. It's just because they can't actually collect their cash. So when I started in Google, I was working in what's called revenue operations, and I'm looking at these various areas because what I was asked at one stage is we're going to break all revenue operations into billing, into collection, into credit management, into revenue retention, into risk management. Which area would you like to go into, Paul? Because I think you fit a lot of these various areas. So I chose collections at that time. And I thought, because having experience with collections, it actually gets right back to getting cash for your business proposition. And getting right back to the reasons people don't pay you. And it's not just because they actually want to hold the cash. It's so many different reasons. Sometimes it's because the billing isn't correct, or they don't understand, or because the data hasn't been collated properly. It goes back right back to sometimes the sales contracts. It goes back to how something was invoiced. How should we have sold to these people in the first place? Did we have the credit control? So I think that because we're actually speaking cash at the end of the day, you actually have to go right across a whole, I suppose, set of various disciplines. So when I actually tried to look at the collection strategy for Google, we actually started out with, well, what do we have? What do Google want? And in any case, in any business, what does any company ever want from their collections? And probably the very first thing we should look at is its revenue generation and then customer experience. Because you can ring up somebody and say, you've got to pay, or we're going to send out a few guys that are going to knock on your door and then we'll get you to pay, but you know you're going to lose your customer. You can look at the reasons why people pay and don't pay you, and sometimes they're just completely dissatisfied with the product. You typically, as collectioners, you're the people who know what's wrong with the business. There are also things you want to minimize losses. You want to actually generate the cash flow that helps the whole business continue to go, and also you want to look at the cost of the operation to make sure it's as efficient as possible. But it's these things on the left, that's what you actually do to generate this. But when you look at how can something as basic as collections impact the revenue? Well, what we've done over the last few years is we've taken on, I'll give you an example of one of the acquisitions. Google is very, very acquisitive. So this is the third kind of companies. I said at the start there were three kind of areas, and I just mentioned two. I'm not sure how many of you picked up on that. But the third type really was these large companies, and I think it's a kind of feature of international business at the moment, as it's been mentioned right through today, that the larger companies are extremely acquisitive. They don't necessarily develop their own products. They're actually always on the lookout for the small startups and the successful startups. It's a little bit like the concept of the turtles. Why don't we let the slower ones fail, and we'll see who gets down to the water, and then we'll pick those guys up and they can be with us. And it's, but from that perspective, what happens is that anybody in collections or billing, we take in these completely diverse revenue models. You have, so we took on, for example, one called DoubleClick a couple of years ago. Noel up there in Arvato worked very closely with us on this, but the kind of thing you see with, what we saw as a relatively small company, it was about a $500 million turnover, but it would have been small from Google perspective, was that you get these issues, and who set up this company in the first place? What were they trying to do? They were entrepreneurs, they had a fantastic idea, they built a great model, and they sold lots of stuff. But actually, because they were startups, because they were creative people, they never actually quite looked back to how will we set up contracts for everybody? How will we actually invoice people? The data, we're getting great data, but how are we going to convert that into invoices? And they didn't have to, because that's not really, they didn't have to because they were extremely successful. And then it came into, I suppose, our area, and I work closely with Arvato, our outsourcer, on this, and we're looking at, well, how do we collect this stuff? We call customers and said, well, we weren't really sure of what we were being invoiced for, or we never agreed to pay this, or we never actually set credit terms. We thought we had 180 days to pay. And then you realize, yeah, there's a huge amount here to collect, but the first thing we've got to do is we have to think of the company itself and say, well, how do we continue to help generate revenue for this company? We don't want to go fairly tough on these guys to actually say, no, you've just got to pay, you owe it, that's it, we sent you an invoice. It's actually going right back to saying, what is this company, do we want to grow it? These are the core companies that were interested in the actual product itself. They can't pay, they won't pay. For all these reasons, we've got to go back and actually resolve every single one of these reasons piece by piece and actually build it from the bottom and let the whole debt continue to build up until actually we know the process that should be there underneath it. So what you start with is, what's the strategy for this company? We've had quite a few acquisitions since in Google where our first question was, what is the strategy for this product? Did Google buy it for the IP? Did Google buy it because they ultimately want to fold it into one of their other products? Or do we really actually want to have this as a separate entity within our organization? And therefore, do we want to go fairly strong in collections? Because you have to go right back to this. If you don't go right back to this, you actually, you just don't get a commercial focus on what you're doing. We also looked at impacts on revenue. We could have fantastic impacts on revenue, not just in Google. In previous telecoms company I was working in, we looked at, so many people pay with credit card, especially when you're B2C. It sounds great. It sounds like this is so simple, we don't actually have to call anybody to collect. But then you actually look at what's actually happening. So many people put in their details, start putting in the credit card details, and actually don't complete the transaction. And you say, well, it was never revenue in the first case, we don't have to actually collect it. Or do you say, hold on a moment, this is also our responsibility. Let's look at this. Let's actually get a group of people, and this is where something we've also done in Google, and again with companies just like Arvato, you're able to work with them. Let's get 30 people on these set of lists of all these people who have actually tried to, or gone so far to set up and just haven't completed the final hurdle. And let's actually see, can we call every single one of these guys and actually generate additional revenue? And as we did, we said within months of one of these products, we were able to say, we're generating an annualized 150 million additional revenue for Google with one of these products. And they're saying, oh, how did you do that? We worked with an outsourcer. We identify that all these guys are signing up, not doing that. Call a load of them. We're getting a 28% turnaround. It's that straightforward. But it's actually just having the experience to think about this, you can actually really bring in additional revenue. So it's not just about, so what I see is collection, started out as a collection job, then we said, no, this is a revenue operations job. It's not quite billing and collections. I know that Neil put this up a while ago and he said, Paul, we'll call this payments and collections. I said, no, Neil, this is revenue operations. And to Royston's point earlier on, in this digital world, the whole thing is global. It's always got to be global. This has got to be global revenue operations. So still a bit, I suppose we like to think, yes, we're helping companies grow, but actually it is really global revenue operations. That's okay. But then the other thing we started looking at as we went through was customer experience. Typically, in any company, there is this tension between the sales organization, even the people right at the top of the organization who are sometimes bonused on growth, on revenue, and the people who are actually managing billing collections, because you don't be rude to our customers. This just doesn't work. You can't do this. Instead, we started looking at, yeah, it's true. We actually should. The next thing after revenue is really customer experience. So some of the kind of things we've looked at are, okay, if you take a very, very traditional approach to collections, you say, we'll invoice everybody on the 30th of April. They've all got to pay by the 30th or 31st of May. Let's have a look at the whole list on the 7th of June. All these guys are overdue. We'll ring them up and say, hey guys, you've got to pay. I said, no. What we've got to do, and we decided, is that's not going to work. It's just painful. It actually, you end up just calling people, and what you get, sometimes people will just pay you and say sorry, but more often they're defensive. They know they haven't actually, they haven't done what they're expected to do. Sometimes they're annoyed because something's gone wrong with an invoice, but sometimes they just feel defensive and actually just either abuse you, shout at you, or just put down the phone or won't answer. So we said, this isn't working. So what's the best approach to do this? And this was, it was nice to work in the Google environment for this, to say, okay guys, let's actually try and take a completely different approach. So we said, okay, imagine a world where there's the billing, there's the due date, and we say, look at that population of people that don't pay. How about predicting who those people are, put them in before the due date, and call them all before it's due. And that's what you'd like to be able to do, but how can you predict all those guys? And then we went back into the science of predicting. We said, it's not that hard to predict it. It isn't rocket science. You just look back. Who typically doesn't pay? Why do they not pay? These are all the reasons. These are the ones least likely to pay. Let's call these guys. And let's call them in advance so that the call is a customer service call. Hello, is everything okay? Our billing isn't right. Have you got our invoices? We don't have our invoices. We'll get them to you. Is there anything else? Yeah, we're not satisfied with the product. What's wrong with the product? Okay, we'll get somebody to call you before it's even due. And we actually stop the conversations. We stop the whole defensiveness. We stop the whole aggression on the phone. I said, is there anything else we can do for you? We've got all this to you. Now, can you make sure we're on the payment run for next week? It makes it, it turned, I suppose, the team, I think, Noel, you probably agree with this, it turned the team with Arvato into people who were coming off each telephone call, distressed, upset, into many people coming off the telephone calls. Yep, they're going to pay. Yep, they're going to pay. Yep, they're going to pay. Cha-ching. And that's really what we're looking for. But actually, more than that, we started doing what we call CSAT, customer satisfaction surveys, and finding the customer satisfaction is going up and up and up because we're being seen as people who give a service rather than just people who are just chasing cash. So it's just partly in the approach to the whole thing. So then we started looking at minimized losses. It doesn't sound like rocket science, but I suppose there are credit professionals all over the world. There's great ways of looking at credit. But then when you're a startup, when you're, or even when you're in a large company and you see all the acquisitions come in, you see the kind of people that the companies have sold to and have been left with balances. Say, look, let's face it, you are never going to collect from these guys in the first place. They're set up in an internet cafe in Turkey, selling these services. There were so many flags, we just should have avoided these from the start. So we I suppose I enjoy this side of it because it's sometimes nice to go back to the sales guys and say, don't sell to these guys, and it actually helps those. So it's a little bit like it became quite a good service back to the sales. So what we want to say is, why don't you give us your leads list in advance? And this is where we actually plugged right into sales, not just in Google, but also in previous companies. Give us your lead lists. Sometimes a lead takes 2 days to prepare something for. Sometimes they're just a quick call. So sometimes the lead list is 1,000 customers. Sometimes it's just 10. If it's just 10, picture a sales guy who's going to do some sort of presentation to each of his potential customers. And it takes him a day, 2 days to do each one. He's got a list of 10. He's got about a week and a half. And he has to choose some of these guys. But what he gets back in advance is, you see these 7? They're all very reliable customers. We expect these to pay quicker. See that 8th one? Not great. And see that 9th and 10th one? Please don't touch these guys with a barge pole. And it actually just saves the sales guys time and saves your organization's time. This stuff it sounds basic, but it actually takes a long time sometimes to actually get to, I suppose, these processes, these procedures. So it's not just about minimizing losses, it's actually about doing it right from the outset. Then we looked at cash flow. Again, it comes back to collection methodologies. Again, for me, it comes back to customer satisfaction, back to a service approach. And then it's actually, you've got to look at the cost of the operation. I suppose I'm aware that we have Arvato in the room here. We've also dealt at times with Accenture, with IBM. And the way we've liked to do it, of course, is they are separate companies. We were separate companies. We'd say, okay, we're partners, but at the same time, we want to make sure there's a value proposition all the time. We want to make sure that if we need 300 collectors on this account, where are we going to get the best value from a customer service perspective, from a revenue perspective, from a quality perspective, as well as a cost perspective. And then you start saying, well, if we only want to call a certain amount of customers, should we call this amount of customers in advance? Or maybe this, and maybe take a chance on it for a couple of months and see what's the cost benefit, because all of this stuff is extremely important. But I'm talking about billing, collections, revenue operations from 3 different perspectives, because it's also really enjoyable, I suppose, for me personally. Of course, I'm listening to speakers right through today, and what's coming out loud and clear right across is actually the passion everybody has for what they're doing. I guess we all love what we're doing, and I love this stuff. But one of the things I really like to see is when you're building up an absolute startup, and you know they've got a great idea, and you know that they actually have no cash or very little cash, and actually they're sending out an invoice, and you say, look, why don't you give this to us? We'll take this section. We'll actually manage to, we'll charge you just on a percentage of what we collect. So it's in our interest that there are no bad debts. It's in our interest that we actually maximize your revenue. But we'll get you on the road, and we'll get you actually set up as quickly as possible with the cash flowing in. Don't worry about it. Keep doing the fantastic stuff you're doing. Keep coming up with innovation. Keep making great revenue models. And where we can, we'll look to help you, not just on collections, but also on revenue retention, and sometimes on actually revenue generation where we can. So I was looking to, I suppose, I was looking at some of these presentations during the day, and I said to Neil a few weeks ago when I gave him this, I said, I'm giving you something very basic here, and I see this looks like a very, very basic presentation, but you know a lot of this isn't rocket science, so probably it's a nice analogy for what we're doing. I think Royson said to me earlier on, Paul, is this so different? Is what you do so different between digital and not digital? And you know a lot of it isn't, but I suppose the core difference is maybe the global nature of it. You're dealing with people in every country in the world, and you have to be aware of it, I guess. It's fantastic to see a really fast-growing economy like, for example, Brazil, and to go down there and see how well the banking is set up and the collection is set up. And you say, I wish it could be like Brazil everywhere in the world, because they have this extraordinary banking system that if you don't pay on time, the bank charges you interest. We said, imagine if we had that in every country in the world. The banks actually do our heavy work for us in Brazil. And then you go to countries like Italy and They're used to paying on 180 days, 270 days, and then you sit with them and say, guys, what are you doing here? What's the problem? And then they say, well, actually, we're in the media industry. You know that Silvio owns this. Silvio has a finger in this. Silvio owns this. The government only pay on 180 days. None of us actually have money. And so what we do is the whole country has to follow the government, and then you realize you're dealing with fantastically astute businessmen. I actually really got to like the way they did business. And then you go to Germany, and the Germans have said, why are you talking to us? Why are you talking to us? You know we always pay exactly on time. And I said, yeah, but it's nice, of course, we play along with the stereotypes. It's fun as well, isn't it? And it's nice to say to the Germans, I just wish you were a bit more like the Italians. And they said, what? We had this thing where we found, especially around 2008, 2009, that more German companies were folding than Italian companies. Because what was happening was the Germans always felt they can run on extremely tight margins. The Germans always pay on time, but they weren't looking forward 4 months and saying, we don't have the cash to pay Google. Where the Italians were saying, ring you up, we've looked 7 months out, we don't have the cash to pay you, can we actually organize a payment plan? And we knew it was a really difficult time for a lot of businesses, so let's sit with you. We'd know whether they're genuine or not. More often than not, of course they were. And you're dealing with companies that said, yeah, you want them to survive. You want them to do business with you. You don't want them to ring you the day before they're due to make the payment and say, I'm sorry, we're going out of business. No, we want them to tell us a few months earlier, we're in trouble. Can you work with us? And so that's what I kept saying at the big German agencies. But whereas the French, they were always lovely. They like to sit you down, shout at you for 40 minutes, and then thank you for coming and listening. So it's it's a little bit different around the world, and it is very entertaining. I suppose it's a huge interest of the job. But the whole international aspect of it was, yes, we're selling all the same stuff, but of course the pressures are very different in different countries. But just to come back to the environment. So what we've looked at here is, speaking to Neil about this over the last couple of months, is what are we as the IDSC? And I think where it'll come down to is, on one hand, a lot of companies have your business. You've got, this stuff is really, really difficult. All day, it's just come shining through. There are so many complexities on so many levels in this. This is one of the complexities, revenue operations. But what you can do is go to the IDSC, we can take this, but we can't do this on our own. And I suppose that's where people like Deloitte come in, that's where people like yourselves, Noel, come in as well. Where myself and Noel met last week and we're saying, yeah, we can be extremely scalable, and maybe Noel, you'd want to put a word in there if you like.
Thank you. One of the things the IDSC can do quite well really is to have that focus there and really bring a lot of structure there to the whole value chain element there, and then being able to leverage a lot of different service providers to quickly scale any business there. I think that's something that can be a real power play there for the centre there, and it offers a lot of opportunities for those companies when they're first starting out and perhaps are shall we say, capital a little bit poorer there and are putting all their money into their product there. I do have a question for you, Paul.
I'm not surprised.
This. Yeah, and you've obviously worked with we've worked together for a few years there, and you've worked with a lot of different companies there. Just in the context of the digital, value chain there, do you see that this lends itself to a model that is more of a, shall we say, rev share type of arrangement there, rather than a traditional service provider arrangement where you pay a fee, either a transaction or headcount or whatever?
I think so. I think it's one of the, I suppose the way I'd like to see us working with companies is that actually it comes out as a percentage of what we're collecting, because then the companies know that we're completely on their side. We're actually trying to boost their revenue, reduce their losses, get the cash in. And that's really the way it should be. But we know in the IDSC what we're about is providing the expertise. We want actually businesses to have a place to go, a one-stop shop for, I suppose, especially the businesses in this digital world, where they can come and say, yeah, we don't know how to do the whole collections bit, and actually we don't even want to know about it. Can you actually get the cash in? And he said, yeah, well, you have to know about it. We will talk to you about it. We will present to you every month, but at the same time, we're not going to ask you to actually have that expertise. You don't have to hire a team of, you don't have to hire a financial controller, you don't have to hire a revenue operations guy just yet if you're just starting out. Or if you're a large company, you said, why don't you just put your acquisitions in here, we'll sort them out, we'll standardize the whole thing and get it out for you. But myself and Neil, our eyes are open. We're going to be a relatively small, lean, I suppose, organization where expertise is our thing. But what we've got to do, we're going to need, at times, we may suddenly need huge ERP solutions. We'll be on the phone to Royston, we'll be talking to you guys. We may suddenly say, okay, we'll need about 150 collectors. We're going to need those in about 2.5 months. Noel, we need you on this. And actually, then we actually discuss the revenue model. And I believe that the best revenue model is actually linked to revenue itself for charging. Because what you really want is businesses, not just you don't want a business to be told, we're going to charge you 4 million for this. And they don't know, are they actually going to achieve 20 million or 300 million as they go through the year. This is this is the reason for the question earlier on, Royce, and I was actually just put it to you. These digital companies have these models where they can't actually predict what the revenue is going to be. It's very, very difficult. I know, speaking to yourself earlier on, it's saying, how could you know what your first day's revenue is going to be, or your first year's revenue? You think it's a good idea, but is it going to be 20 million? Is it going to be 300 million? Who knows? And should you be taking a risk on the cost, because you actually don't want to underhit it and say, yeah, we might be 300 million in the first 2 years, but then if we are, we will need a revenue operations area that's going to cost us 30 million. But you don't want to commit to a 30 million from day one when the revenue could be just 20 million itself. So I think the model, absolutely, no, it should be actually just percentage of, and probably collected revenue, not just actually revenue itself. So that's the way. So the reason I have that environment is I have a lovely golden egg there for ourselves, Neil, which is the IDSC expertise, but it's your business. We're kind of the in-between, and then on the right-hand side we have the BPOs, but it's not just BPOs, it's also I suppose the partners, and this is what we discussed earlier on. It's about partnership. So to conclude on this, what I've said, this is what I'd like to feel that the companies get. They can focus on their own business development. What they get from us is global expertise in operations management, and probably a commercial revenue focused approach. And it's about looking after your customers, developing your revenue, and then ongoing. I have that CSAT reporting. That's what we call customer satisfaction surveys, just to make sure that you get that feedback. The great thing about being involved in collections is that you know exactly what's hurting the business, and actually to give that feedback in real time is fantastic information. It's often difficult for a sales guy or senior executives to get real feedback from the people on the ground, what they don't like about your product. You can send out all the surveys you want, but actually we get it because people won't pay you if actually they don't like what they've got. So I guess I'm trying to cover a lot and give you some sort of idea of what we do and what we're proposing to do over the coming months. We'd like to hear from you, as many of you as possible, but maybe if there are any questions on that, or is it all very straightforward?